Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when the sun wasn't just a giant lamp in the sky, but the ultimate timekeeper. Imagine, if you will, the scorching sands of ancient Egypt beneath your bare feet, the air thick with the scent of dust and distant incense. You feel the relentless desert sun on your skin, and you realize something profound. The very shadow you cast is a clock, silently tracking the hours as the day unfolds. You watch as your own elongated silhouette shrinks, then stretches again, a constant, undeniable testament to the passage of time. It's a world without digital displays, without even the gentle tick-tock of a grandfather clock. Your smartphone is a far-off fantasy, a concept utterly alien to the people who walked these lands. You probably won't survive a day here without a serious case of sand in your sandals, let alone understand how anything gets done without a precise schedule. But here, life moved to the rhythm of the sun, the stars, and the mighty Nile. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening from, say, Bobodula, tell me the time there right now. Or maybe you're in Reykjavik watching the midnight sun play tricks on the shadows. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the banks of the Nile, the lifeblood of this ancient civilization, and the sun is just beginning its ascent. The very first hint of time measurement here wasn't some grand invention, but a simple, intuitive observation. You see, even without a clock face or numbers, the shifting length and direction of a shadow are undeniable. Think about it. A stick, stuck in the ground, crude, yes, but incredibly effective for its purpose. As the sun climbs, the shadow shrinks, growing shortest at high noon, then lengthening again as the day wanes. It's like a silent, cosmic ballet playing out across the desert floor every single day. This wasn't just some casual observation. It was the foundation of an entire system. The earliest forms of sundials, if you can even call them that, were indeed just stakes or obelisks, towering monuments that cast a distinct shadow. The Egyptians, ever practical and deeply connected to their environment, quickly realized that the changing length and direction of these shadows could be used to mark the passage of time. Historians still argue whether the initial purpose was purely practical, perhaps for agricultural timings or temple rituals, or if it held a more profound, almost spiritual significance, connecting the earthly realm to the celestial movements. You can almost picture a priest, or perhaps a farmer, carefully watching the shadow of a palm tree, noting its position at a certain point in the day. Ah, the shadow has reached the edge of the irrigation ditch. He might think, time to water the northern fields. It's a very organic, almost sleepy way to track the hours, isn't it? No jarring alarms, just the slow, deliberate march of the sun. These early shadow clocks were remarkably ingenious in their simplicity. Imagine a flat piece of stone, perhaps limestone, with a T-shaped piece sticking out. This T-shape was the gnomon, the part that casts the shadow. The base of the stone would have a series of markings, often just lines, which the shadow would cross throughout the day. It's essentially a very basic analog display. You wouldn't be getting the exact minute, of course. This wasn't about precision down to the second. It was about dividing the day into usable segments. The ancient Egyptians, bless their methodical hearts, divided their daylight hours into 12 parts. Yes, 12. Just like us. But their hours weren't fixed 60-minute intervals. Oh no. That would be far too consistent for a system based on shadows. Here's where it gets delightfully quirky. Since the length of the day changes with the seasons, so too did the length of their hours. A daylight hour in summer, when the sun hangs high and long, would be considerably longer than a daylight hour in winter. So, you'd have these flexible, stretchy hours, expanding and contracting with the sun's journey across the sky. It's almost like the day itself was breathing, expanding in summer, contracting in winter. You can imagine the confusion. Meet me in 3 hours. Someone might say, and you'd have to mentally calculate if it was a long 3 hours or a short 3 hours, depending on the season. It certainly adds a layer of delightful ambiguity to their appointments, doesn't it? Perhaps that's why they were so renowned for their patience. You just had to wait for the shadow to tell you. One of the most famous examples of these early sundials is the one found in the tomb of Seti I, dating back to around 1300 BCE. It's a beautifully preserved piece showing the T-shaped gnomon and a series of 5 marked lines. This wasn't just a tool, it was a testament to their understanding of celestial mechanics. They weren't just passively observing, they were actively codifying these observations into a functional system. The markings on these devices weren't random. They corresponded to specific periods of the day, allowing for a remarkably consistent, albeit seasonally flexible, measurement of time. The beauty of these early sundials lies in their direct connection to the natural world. There were no gears, no springs, no complex mechanisms to fail, just the sun, an object to cast a shadow, and a marked surface. It's the ultimate low-tech solution to a high-demand problem. How do you organize your day when the only constant is change? And organize it they did. From the construction of monumental pyramids, requiring incredible coordination of labor, to the precise timings for religious rituals, time was a crucial element. The shadow clock, in its most basic form, provided that initial framework. Think about the sheer practicalities. You're a baker in ancient Thebes. The sun is your oven, but also your clock. You know that when the shadow reaches a certain mark, it's time to start kneading the dough. When it hits another, it's time to put the bread in the community oven. And when the shadow stretches long and thin, almost disappearing, it's time to call it a day, dust the flour from your hands, and perhaps share a fermented beverage with your neighbors. It wasn't about frantic deadlines or rushing from one appointment to the next. It was about flow, about syncing human activity with the grand rhythms of the cosmos. The concept of a day itself was different. For the Egyptians, the day began at sunrise. Not midnight, not some arbitrary moment, but when the sun kissed the horizon, awakening the world. This makes perfect sense when your primary time-telling device is powered by the sun itself, and it lends a certain poetry to their daily existence, doesn't it? Every dawn was a fresh start, a new opening act in the grand theatrical production of the sun's journey across the sky. The Egyptians' mastery of shadow geometry wasn't just limited to these small, portable sundials. Oh no, they thought bigger, much, much bigger. The towering obelisks that punctuated their temple complexes and cities weren't just decorative monoliths. They were, in essence, colossal sundials. Imagine the shadow of an obelisk stretching across vast temple courtyards, its movement dictating the timing of sacred rites and public gatherings. It's a truly majestic way to tell time, making the very landscape a living clock. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, aren't we? For now, just hold that image of the simple stick casting its quiet, profound shadow on the sand. The very first tick of ancient Egyptian time. From those humble beginnings with a simple stick in the sand, you now turn your gaze towards the truly monumental. Imagine yourself standing at the foot of an ancient Egyptian obelisk, perhaps in the sprawling complex of Karnak. The sheer scale is breathtaking. These colossal single-stone pillars, often carved from a reddish granite quarried hundreds of miles away in Aswan, weren't merely architectural embellishments or markers of pharaonic power, though they certainly served those purposes with undeniable flair. No, these towering stone needles, reaching for the heavens, were also the grandest sundials ever conceived. You tilt your head back, your neck craning, as the morning sun begins to catch its apex, casting an impossibly long shadow that stretches across the sacred precinct. These obelisks, with their precisely carved forms and smooth surfaces, acted as gigantic gnomons. Think of them as the ultimate high-definition shadowcasters. The shadow they produced wasn't just a blurred blob. It was a defined, measurable edge that crawled across the ground, tracing the sun's path with an undeniable grace. The area around the base of many obelisks would have been carefully paved, sometimes with markings etched into the stone, serving as a massive public clock face. You can almost hear the soft scuff of sandals as people gathered, not just to admire the pharaoh's might, but to gauge the time of day by the shadow's steady progress. The Egyptians' fascination with obelisks wasn't just about their impressive engineering. It was deeply intertwined with their solar religion. The obelisk was a symbol of the sun god Ra, its tapering form representing the sun's rays. So, to use it to track the sun's journey across the sky was not just practical. It was an act of profound spiritual significance, a daily communion with the divine. You stand there, feeling the history radiating from the stone, and you realize that every measurement of time was, in a way, a prayer. Historians still argue whether the primary function of every obelisk was timekeeping, or if some were purely symbolic, with their time-telling aspect being a beneficial side effect. However, the evidence from temple layouts and the precise orientation of many obelisks suggests a deliberate design choice to maximize their utility as celestial instruments. For example, many were placed strategically within temple complexes to align with specific astronomical events, or to cast shadows that would illuminate certain altars or doorways at precise moments of the day, signaling the time for particular rituals. Consider the complexity involved. To build an obelisk, quarry it from the distant mines, transport it down the Nile, and then erect it, sometimes weighing hundreds of tons, required an understanding of engineering, logistics, and, crucially, a highly organized workforce. And how do you organize such a workforce without a reliable way to tell time? The obelisk itself, while a time teller, was also a product of a society that was already, by necessity, quite time conscious. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Did the need for precise timekeeping lead to the obelisk as a tool, or did the obelisk as a religious symbol simply lend itself naturally to the role of a monumental clock? You ponder this as a gentle breeze carrying the faint scent of the desert rustles past you. The grandeur of these obelisk sundials meant they weren't just for individuals. They were communal clocks, visible to all. Imagine a marketplace bustling with activity. The shadow of the nearby obelisk slowly creeping across the plaza would signal the time for merchants to pack up their wares, or for the start of the afternoon's trading. It removed the guesswork, providing a universally understood temporal marker for a large population. It's like their version of the town hall clock, but with way more dramatic flair. But here's a quirky tidbit. While these colossal sundials were impressive for public timekeeping, they weren't exactly portable. You couldn't exactly slip an obelisk into your toga pocket for a quick time check. This meant that for more personal or immediate timekeeping, those smaller T-shaped sundials were still very much in use. You might have seen one being carried by a priest, perhaps, or a high-ranking official, carefully balancing it as they moved through the temple grounds. It's a delightful contrast between the massive, immobile public clock and the more intimate, personal timekeeping device. The understanding of shadow behavior that the Egyptians developed from these obelisks and smaller sundials was profound. They knew that the shadow's length and direction changed not just throughout the day, but also throughout the year. They observed the solstices, when the sun reached its highest or lowest point in the sky, resulting in the shortest or longest midday shadows. They recognized the equinoxes, when day and night were roughly equal, and the shadow behavior was consistent. This wasn't just about telling the time of day. It was about understanding the sun's annual journey, a fundamental aspect of their calendar and agricultural cycle. It's the subtle, slow dance of the seasons, recorded in stone. This celestial dance had a direct impact on their agricultural practices, which, as you know, were entirely dependent on the annual flooding of the Nile. Predicting the flood, understanding the seasons of planting and harvesting, was literally a matter of life and death. The sun and its shadows provided crucial clues. The long, stretching shadows of winter gave way to the shorter, more direct shadows of summer, signaling the approach of the vital inundation. It's a continuous cycle, an ancient rhythm that governed every aspect of their existence. You might think that such a system, based on shadows, would be prone to error, especially on cloudy days, and you'd be right. The very concept of time, for the ancient Egyptians, was inherently tied to the sun's presence. If the sun wasn't shining, their primary daylight timekeeping method was, well, out of order. This meant that the concept of time itself was more fluid, less rigidly defined than our modern, hyper-precise measurements. A cloudy day wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a day when the very beat of time felt different, less clear. It probably led to a lot of "I'll get to it when the sun comes out" attitudes, which, honestly, sounds pretty relaxing. But even with their reliance on the sun, they understood that the day wasn't just about the bright hours. There was the long stretch of darkness, too, and for that, the obelisk was utterly useless. You can't cast a shadow if there's no light. So, while the obelisk stood as a majestic testament to their daytime timekeeping prowess, it highlighted the need for entirely different methods once the sun dipped below the horizon. This duality, day by shadow and night by the means, shaped their understanding of time as a whole. It's almost as if the day and night were two distinct temporal realms, each with its own set of rules. The engineering required to quarry, transport, and erect these monstrous stone needles is a testament to their ingenuity and organizational skills. We still marvel at it today, and it underscores the idea that timekeeping, even in its most basic forms, was a foundational element of their sophisticated society. Without some way to coordinate effort, to schedule events, to know when to start and when to stop, the pyramids wouldn't have risen, the temples wouldn't have been built, and the society wouldn't have functioned. The obelisk, therefore, stands not just as a sun clock, but as a silent monument to the very concept of organized time itself in the ancient world. You blink slowly, the lingering image of the immense shadow slowly turning on the ground, a silent, ancient hand on the dial of history. You've seen the sun climb, casting its long, then short, then long shadow, a silent hand across the face of the desert. Now, let's dive deeper into that daily journey, the precise mechanics of how the ancient Egyptians read the time from the sun's steady march. It's more nuanced than just long shadow, short shadow. You're no longer just observing. You're learning to read the subtle language of light and shade, a language spoken by the sun itself. Imagine yourself on a clear morning in ancient Egypt. The sun is just peeking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Your T-shaped sundial, perhaps a finely carved piece of dark wood or polished stone, lies flat on the ground. The gnomon, that upright bar, casts an incredibly long shadow towards the west. As the sun begins its ascent, you watch this shadow. It doesn't just shrink, it also begins to swing. This dual movement, changes in length and changes in direction, is the key to understanding how the Egyptians divided their days. As the sun rises higher, its rays hit the gnomon at a steeper angle, causing the shadow to progressively shorten. At the exact moment the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, what we call true noon, the shadow will be at its absolute shortest, pointing directly north if you're in the northern hemisphere, which Egypt largely is. This was a crucial marker for them, the midpoint of their daylight hours. After noon, the sun begins its descent towards the western horizon, and the shadow starts to lengthen again, now pointing towards the east. The whole process is incredibly elegant, a perfectly predictable celestial ballet performed daily. The markings on their sundials weren't just random lines, they were carefully calibrated. Some sundials had a series of lines radiating outwards from the base of the gnomon, marking the direction of the shadow. Others had concentric arcs to indicate length. Often, a combination of both would be used. You'd find etched hieroglyphs or simple numbers along these lines, designating the hour. But remember, these weren't fixed 60-minute hours. Instead, the Egyptians divided the period from sunrise to sunset into 12 equal hours. So, if the day was long, say 14 hours by our modern reckoning, each of their hours would be longer. If the day was short, say 10 hours, their hours would be shorter. This system is known as temporal hours, or unequal hours. This concept of temporal hours might feel strange to you, accustomed as you are to the unyielding tick of a clock that never changes its pace. But for the Egyptians, it was perfectly logical. The sun was their clock, and its daily journey was their guide. The length of the day itself was their fundamental unit, simply divided into 12 parts, regardless of the season. It's like saying, we'll divide the daylight into 12 slices, and sometimes those slices are thick, sometimes they're thin. You can almost imagine the subtle shrug, the acceptance of nature's variability. This seasonal variation, where the sun's path in the sky changes throughout the year, meant that a single sundial wouldn't be accurate year-round for truly precise measurements. A sundial designed for summer would be less accurate in winter because the sun's trajectory across the sky is lower in the winter months. This would affect both the length and direction of the shadow at any given hour. This is why some sundials have multiple sets of markings, or even movable gnomons, designed to be adjusted for different seasons. Historians still argue whether all sundials were seasonally adjusted, or if some were simpler devices primarily used for approximate timekeeping for specific periods. It points to a nuanced understanding of celestial mechanics, far beyond just, it gets dark, then light. Consider the practical implications. If you were a temple priest, meticulously timing a ritual that had to occur at the 3rd hour of daylight, you'd need a sundial that accounted for the season. A misalignment could be seen as an offense to the gods, so accuracy within their system was paramount for certain applications. For the common farmer, perhaps less so. They probably just needed to know if it was morning, midday, or late afternoon to coordinate their work in the fields. The movement of the shadow isn't perfectly linear either, especially when the sun is low on the horizon. The angle changes more dramatically at sunrise and sunset, making those hours stretch out a bit more, while the midday hours feel more compressed. The Egyptians, with their keen observational skills, surely noticed this. Their sundial designs reflect an attempt to account for these subtle distortions. It's a remarkable feat of practical astronomy, done without complex mathematical formulas, but through patient observation and careful calibration. And here's a light-hearted thought. Imagine being late for an appointment in ancient Egypt. Sorry, I'm late. The sun was being particularly leisurely this morning, and the shadow just wasn't moving. Or perhaps the shadow decided to take a detour. Blame the equinox. It certainly gives you more excuses than traffic. You chuckle to yourself, picturing the exasperated looks of your ancient Egyptian friends. The directionality of the shadow was also incredibly important. Beyond just length, the ancient Egyptians could use the shadow to determine cardinal directions. At true noon, the shadow of a vertical gnomon points exactly north. This was not just useful for timekeeping, but for aligning their monumental structures. The precise north-south alignment of pyramids and temples, for example, relied on sophisticated astronomical observations, often using the shadows cast by obelisks or smaller gnomons to establish these cardinal points with remarkable accuracy. It's a testament to their grasp of applied geometry and astronomy. You might wonder, how did they know true noon without a modern clock? Simple. It's the moment of the shortest shadow. If you mark the shadow's length every few minutes around midday, you'll find a distinct minimum point. That minimum point is true noon. It's an observable fact, not a calculation, and it provided a consistent reference point for their temporal hour system. This consistent daily marker anchored their understanding of the day's progression. This system of tracking the sun's shadow provided the bedrock for all their other forms of timekeeping. It was the fundamental, universal clock for the land of the Nile. It dictated when the markets opened, when workers headed to the fields, when the priests performed their rituals, and when the pharaoh conducted his daily affairs. It wasn't just a method. It was a way of life, interwoven with the very fabric of their society. But what about when the sun wasn't available? What about those dreaded cloudy days, or more importantly, the long moonlit nights? The shadow, however reliable during the day, was useless once the sun dipped below the horizon. This limitation meant that the Egyptians, ever resourceful, had to devise entirely different methods to track time during the hours of darkness. The transition from the sun-drenched day to the star-filled night required a completely different approach to timekeeping. You shift your weight, feeling the gentle hum of the fan, and you imagine the cool desert air settling in as the stars begin to appear, signaling the need for new methods, new understandings of time's ceaseless flow. As the last sliver of the sun dips below the western horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, you watch the desert cool. The long shadows of the afternoon stretch, then merge with the encroaching darkness. Your trusty sundial, so reliable during the day, is now just a silent, inert piece of stone. The stars begin to prick the inky blackness above, and with them comes an entirely different challenge for timekeeping. How do you measure the night when the grand cosmic clock of the sun is out of sight? The ancient Egyptians, ever resourceful, turned to water. Enter the clepsydra, or water clock. This ingenious device was the answer to the night's temporal dilemma. Imagine a large, ornate alabaster vessel, shaped like an inverted cone. Near its base, a tiny hole, precisely bored, allows water to drip out at a slow, steady pace. Inside, on the sloped inner surface of the vessel, are a series of markings. As the water level slowly drops, these markings are revealed, indicating the passage of time. You lean closer, listening to the gentle, rhythmic drip of the water, a sound far more soothing than any modern alarm. It's the ASMR of ancient timekeeping. The earliest known water clock dates back to the reign of Amenhotep I, around 1500 BCE, though evidence suggests they were in use even earlier. These weren't just simple buckets with holes. They were sophisticated instruments, often beautifully decorated with hieroglyphs and scenes of deities. Some were even shaped like a seated baboon, a creature associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and time. Now, that's a funky way to tell the time, consulting a stone primate, just like the sundials. The water clocks faced a unique challenge, the changing length of the night throughout the year. The Egyptians divided the night, like the day, into 12 hours. But these night hours were also temporal hours, meaning their length varied with the seasons. A summer night, short and sweet, meant shorter night hours, while a long winter night resulted in longer night hours. This posed a specific problem for the clepsydra. If the hole released water at a constant rate, the markings inside would need to change for each month or season to accurately reflect these varying temporal hours, and indeed, they did. Surviving examples of Egyptian clepsydras, like the one from Karnak now in the Cairo Museum, demonstrate this remarkable ingenuity. They have multiple sets of markings, often arranged in columns, each column corresponding to a different month. You'd fill the clepsydra at sunset, And then, as the water drained, you'd read the hour from the appropriate column for that month. It required a bit of seasonal adjustment, a bit of mental calibration, but it was incredibly effective. It's almost like a flipbook of time, where each page represents a different month's progression. The principle behind the clepsydra is simple: consistent flow. However, maintaining that consistent flow was the tricky part. As the water level in the vessel drops, the pressure decreases, which would naturally slow the rate of flow from the hull. To counteract this, the conical shape of many clepsydras was crucial. The widening top and tapering bottom meant that, as the water level dropped, the decreasing surface area helped to maintain a more consistent rate of flow, or at least a predictable rate that could be compensated for in the markings. It's a clever bit of fluid dynamics, millennia before anyone even coined the term. Historians still argue about the exact methods used to calibrate these early clepsydras. Was it done empirically, through repeated observation and trial and error, adjusting the markings until they accurately reflected the temporal hours of the night? Or was there a more theoretical, mathematical understanding at play? Given the Egyptians' advanced knowledge of geometry and surveying, it's plausible they had methods that combined both. You can almost picture an ancient Egyptian craftsman hunched over a clepsydra, patiently marking it day after day, month after month, calibrating it with the stars until it was just right. The clepsydra offered a significant advantage over sundials. It worked indoors, it worked on cloudy nights, and crucially, it worked when the sun was nowhere to be seen. This made it invaluable for temple rituals that often took place at night, for guard duty, or simply for knowing when to wake up, for an early start without the sun's cue. Imagine a high priest, deep within the temple, needing to begin a sacred chant precisely at the 5th hour of the night. He wouldn't be peering at the stars. He'd be glancing at the water clock, watching the levels steadily fall beyond the temple. These clocks would have been essential for workers in quarries or mines who labored through the night, or for anyone needing to regulate their sleep cycles. You might have even had a small personal one in your wealthy estate, its gentle dripping a calming presence in the quiet of the night, almost like a white noise machine. You close your eyes, imagining that rhythmic sound, a lullaby of passing time. There's a quirky tidbit about some clepsydra designs. Instead of just a simple outflow, some had a float with a pointer that would rise or fall with the water level, making the reading even easier. Other, more complex versions, particularly in later periods, might have even incorporated simple mechanisms, like a gear that turned a dial, anticipating mechanical clocks by thousands of years. While these highly elaborate versions are rare, for ancient Egypt, the basic principle laid the groundwork for future horological innovations. It shows the ancient mind's persistent drive to automate time-telling. The water clock also highlighted the fundamental distinction the Egyptians made between daylight hours and nighttime hours. They were treated as separate entities, each with their own 12 divisions, rather than a continuous 24-hour cycle as we understand it today. This meant the hour at midnight might not be the same duration as the hour at midday, or even the hour at 3 a.m. It's a very organic, almost living system of time, rather than our rigid, abstract grid. You can't help but feel a little bit jealous of their flexibility. No need to rush if the hour itself is stretching out. The clepsydras' accuracy, while remarkable for its time, wasn't perfect. Changes in water viscosity due to temperature fluctuations could affect the flow rate. Evaporation would also play a small role, but for their purposes, and given the technology available, they were incredibly reliable. They provided a consistent, measurable way to track the passage of the night, allowing for greater organization and predictability in a world that otherwise relied on celestial observations that could be obscured by clouds or the moon's cycle. So, as the stars twinkle overhead and the desert wind whispers through the palm trees, you understand that the ancient Egyptians didn't just measure time by what they saw in the sky. They measured it by the slow, inexorable flow of water, a quiet, continuous process that brought order to the darkness. And in doing so, they bridged the gap between the sun-drenched day and the enigmatic night, ensuring that time, in its own unique, stretchy way, was always accounted for. You can almost feel the cool dampness of the water as it steadily drips, a soft, soothing reminder of time's gentle, relentless march. The gentle drip of the clepsydra lulls you into a sense of ancient calm, a rhythm for the inky darkness of night. But as you lift your gaze from the water clock, your eyes drift upwards, past the shadowed palm fronds, to the celestial tapestry. Above, pinpricks of light, countless and shimmering, begin to reveal themselves. This is the realm of the star clocks, the ancient Egyptians' most profound and perhaps most poetic method of telling time during the long, sunless hours. You feel a distinct chill in the desert air as the night truly deepens, and the vastness of the cosmos seems to press down on you. The Egyptians were consummate sky watchers. For millennia, they observed the heavens, charting the movements of stars and constellations with a precision that still astounds modern astronomers. They understood that just as the sun moved across the day sky, the stars, too, followed predictable paths across the night sky. This constant, unyielding motion of the celestial sphere provided an unparalleled cosmic clock, visible to anyone who knew how to read it. Their method for telling time by the stars relied on a concept called decans. Imagine the night sky divided into 36 distinct sections or constellations, each one rising above the horizon sequentially. Each of these decans marked a period of roughly 10 days, and more importantly for our purposes, they also marked hours of the night. A typical night was divided into 12 hours, just like the day, and these hours were often associated with the rising or culmination of specific decanal stars. To use a star clock, an ancient Egyptian observer, often a priest or an astronomer, would lie on their back, perhaps on a special viewing platform, and watch for the rising of particular decanal stars. Imagine doing this night after night, your neck growing stiff as you track the slow, majestic sweep of the heavens. They would align themselves with a fixed point, perhaps the North Star, though not Polaris as we know it, as the North Celestial pole has shifted over millennia. Then, by noting which decan was rising above the horizon, or which one had reached a specific position in the sky, they could tell the time. One of the most fascinating examples of this stellar timekeeping is found on the lids of sarcophagi and on the ceilings of tombs, known as decanal calendars or star clocks. These elaborate charts depicted the 36 decans and their corresponding hours for each month of the year. It's like having a personalized star chart etched onto your eternal resting place, ensuring you'd always know the time, even in the afterlife. Talk about being prepared. Historians still argue about the practical application of these complex star charts in everyday life. Were they purely for religious or astrological purposes, or did ordinary people use simplified versions for nocturnal activities, while the more elaborate charts likely required specialized knowledge and were primarily used by priests and scribes for temple rituals and astronomical observations? The general concept of recognizing key stars to mark the passage of the night would have been more widely understood. You can almost hear a farmer saying, "Well, the dog star is nearly at its peak, so it must be almost time to prepare for the morning market." A quirky tidbit: the decans weren't just about time. They also held significant astrological importance. Each decan was believed to influence different aspects of life, and certain rituals or events might be timed to coincide with the ascendancy of a particular decan. So, telling time by the stars wasn't just a utilitarian act, it was interwoven with their spiritual beliefs and their understanding of destiny. It's a universe where time and fate danced together. The star clocks were particularly important for navigating the longest nights of winter, when the sun's presence was brief and the clepsydra provided only a mechanical measure. The stars, however, were eternal, constant, a vast and unchanging timepiece above. They allowed for a precise division of the night into 12 temporal hours, just like the day, and just like the daylight hours. These nocturnal hours varied in length depending on the season, meaning the specific decan rising at a certain hour would change from month to month. This is why the decanal calendars had different rows for different parts of the year. The most famous of these celestial timekeepers was the star Sopdet, which we know as Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. It's heliacal, rising, the first time it becomes visible, just before sunrise, after a period of invisibility, was a monumental event for the Egyptians. It heralded the annual inundation of the Nile, the life-giving flood that replenished their lands. So, Sopdet wasn't just a time marker, it was a calendar in the sky, a harbinger of life and prosperity. You feel a shiver, a sense of awe, as you contemplate the profound connection these ancient people had with the cosmos. To accurately use these star clocks, observers needed a clear view of the horizon and a stable reference point. They might use a transit instrument, essentially a sighting tube or a plumb bob, to align themselves precisely and note when a particular star crossed a specific meridian in the sky. This kind of observation required patience, dedication, and a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a focused, almost meditative act of astronomical observation. The star clocks were instrumental for the priesthood, who had to perform rituals at specific nocturnal hours. They also played a role in navigation, particularly for those traveling the Nile at night. Knowing the time by the stars could help estimate distances traveled or predict arrival times, though perhaps not with the precision of a modern GPS. It speaks to a society that was highly organized, even after dark. One of the challenges with stellar timekeeping, and historians still debate this, is the visibility of the stars themselves. Light pollution wasn't an issue, but clouds certainly were. A cloudy night would render the star clock useless, forcing reliance back on the ever-dripping clepsydra. It highlights the multifaceted approach the Egyptians took to timekeeping, having backup systems for different conditions. They weren't putting all their eggs in one astronomical basket, which is pretty clever, if you ask me. You can almost hear the grumbling on a particularly overcast night. Great. Another night relying on that drippy water thing. Can't see a single decan. The meticulous tracking of decans also allowed the Egyptians to understand the slow, grand cycle of the year. The heliacal rising of Sopdet, which occurred roughly every 365 days, helped them establish a civil calendar of 365 days. This calendar, while not perfectly accurate in its earliest forms, was a monumental achievement in timekeeping, and formed the backbone of their administration and religious life. It's the moment when daily time-telling truly met long-term calendrical planning, bridging the micro and the macro. So, as you stand beneath the vast star-strewn canvas of the ancient Egyptian night sky, you realize that time was not just measured by shadows and drips. It was measured by the silent, majestic ballet of the stars, each one a cosmic cog in the grand machinery of time. It was a profound connection to the universe, a daily and nightly reminder that humanity, however small, was intricately linked to the vast, unfolding patterns of the cosmos. You feel a serene calm, a deep connection to that ancient world as you drift deeper into the mysteries of time. With the sun's shadow, the water's drip, and the stars' stately dance, you've seen how the ancient Egyptians meticulously tracked the hours of their days and nights. Now, let's shift our focus from the mechanics of timekeeping to the people who wielded these tools, the figures who stood at the heart of regulating the rhythmic pulse of ancient Egyptian society. You step, as it were, from the quiet, observational world of the astronomer into the bustling, ritual-filled domain of the temple. Here, the priests were not just spiritual guides, they were the ultimate keepers of time. Imagine yourself walking through the towering colonnades of a vast temple, perhaps in Thebes, the air thick with the scent of offerings and the murmur of chants. You hear the distant sound of sistra shaking, a rhythmic, metallic whisper. In this sacred space, the priests held immense power and responsibility, and a significant part of that was their role as timekeepers. They were, in essence, the nation's chronometers, responsible for the precise timing of religious ceremonies, festivals, and the daily cycles of worship that governed the lives of both pharaoh and commoner. The temple was the epicenter of astronomical observation, serving as permanent star charts. Within these hallowed halls, specialized priests, known as Imunet or Hour Watchers, meticulously observed the heavens and operated the sophisticated water clocks. Their training was rigorous, combining deep astronomical knowledge with an understanding of complex rituals and the sacred calendar. You can almost see them, eyes narrowed, peering through sighting tubes, or carefully tending to the water levels in a clepsydra. Their role wasn't just about knowing what time it was about ensuring cosmic harmony for the ancient Egyptians. The orderly passage of time was intrinsically linked to the stability of the universe and the well-being of Egypt itself. If a ritual was performed at the wrong hour, if an offering was made at an inauspicious moment, the balance of cosmic order and justice could be disrupted. The stakes were incredibly high. This wasn't just a job, it was a sacred duty. a continuous act of maintaining divine equilibrium. The daily temple rituals, from the opening of the shrine at dawn to the final sealing at dusk, were timed with remarkable precision. The rising of certain decan stars would signal the start of nocturnal ceremonies. The length of a shadow on a monumental obelisk or a portable sundial would indicate the hour for a daytime procession. The clepsydras' steady drip allowed for consistent timing even when the sky was obscured or during the dark hours. These were not casual affairs. They were highly orchestrated events that required exact timing. Much like a modern orchestra depends on its conductor to keep the rhythm. Historians still argue about the exact division of labor within the priesthood regarding timekeeping. Was there a dedicated college of astronomers who then relayed the time to other priests for ritual purposes? Or was the knowledge more broadly distributed among the higher ranks? What is clear is that the priests were the custodians of this vital information, controlling access to time itself. In a way, you wouldn't just ask a random person for the time. You'd consult the temple or wait for a public signal orchestrated by its functionaries. A quirky tidbit: some temple precincts even had special shadow lines or markers on their pavements that would align with the shadows cast by specific architectural features at certain times of the day or year. These weren't just for telling the hour, but for indicating the precise moment for a solar alignment within the temple, perhaps illuminating a statue of a deity or a hidden altar. It's like the temple itself was a giant, living clock, activated by the sun's divine touch beyond the daily rituals. The priests were also responsible for managing the sacred calendar, a complex system that intertwined the civil year with the lunar calendar and the heliacal rising of Sirius. They determined the dates of religious festivals, the beginning of the agricultural seasons, and the important anniversaries of pharaohs and gods. This required sophisticated astronomical calculations and careful record-keeping over many years, observing and predicting celestial events with remarkable accuracy. Think about the power this gave them. They didn't just tell people what time it was. They told them when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate, when to mourn. They were the arbiters of rhythm for an entire civilization. It's like they held the very heartbeat of Egypt in their hands, regulating its pulse through the careful management of time. You can feel the weight of that responsibility, a silent pressure to maintain harmony. The training for these priestly timekeepers would have been extensive. They would have been educated in mathematics, astronomy, and religious texts. The knowledge would have been passed down through generations, often within specific priestly families. This ensured continuity and accuracy, but also created a closed system where timekeeping knowledge was highly guarded. It wasn't a casual pursuit. It was a lifetime dedication, a scholarly and spiritual calling intertwined for the vast majority of the population. The temple's timekeeping provided the public time signals, the blowing of trumpets, the striking of gongs, or the unfurling of standards at certain hours would inform the wider community of the passage of time. So, while you might not have had a personal sundial, you would still be living by the rhythm, established and maintained by the temple priests. It was the ancient equivalent of town clocks chiming the hour, but with far more pomp and circumstance. That this central role of the priesthood in timekeeping highlights the deeply integrated nature of religion and daily life in ancient Egypt. The very act of telling time was often a religious one, a way of honoring the cosmic order established by the gods. The sun god Ra was the ultimate timekeeper, and his priests were merely instruments in his grand design. You can almost feel the presence of the divine in every passing shadow, every dripping drop. Of course, maintaining this precise schedule wasn't without its challenges. Cloud cover, as we've discussed, could obscure the stars, and the water clocks, while reliable, still required constant attention to be refilled and monitored. There would have been pressure, a need for vigilance, to ensure that the sacred rhythms were never broken, praying for the stars to peek through. The priest's control over time wasn't just about rituals. It also extended to the timing of administrative functions, royal decrees, and even the coordination of large-scale construction projects. Think of the building of a pyramid or a massive temple complex. Thousands of workers, materials arriving from far off Khwarazm. Of this required incredibly precise scheduling, and the priestly timekeepers were at the heart of that coordination. Historians still marvel at the logistical feats of the ancient Egyptians, and their mastery of timekeeping was undoubtedly a major contributing factor. So, as you leave the temple precinct, the lingering echoes of ancient chants in your ears, you understand that the priests were far more than just religious figures. They were the orchestrators of time, the living embodiment of Egypt's cosmic clock. Their dedication ensured that the intricate dance of shadows, water, and stars translated into a structured, harmonious existence for an entire civilization. You drift, sensing the rhythmic pulse of that ancient world, ever so slowly. You've seen the priests meticulously charting the hours, their solemn duty to keep the cosmos in harmony. But what was all this timekeeping for, beyond the sacred rituals? As you step out of the temple's cool shadows and into the bright sunlight, you feel the pervasive heat of the Egyptian sun, and a new understanding dawns. The most critical application of all this temporal knowledge wasn't found in elaborate rituals or grand monuments. It was in the lifeblood of Egypt itself, the Nile. You stand on its banks, watching its steady, brown flow, and you realize that understanding time was, quite literally, understanding the river's rhythm. Imagine the sheer anxiety, the absolute dependence placed upon the annual flooding of the Nile. This wasn't just a river. It was the bringer of life, of sustenance. Without its annual inundation, the fertile black land would turn to barren desert. Predicting when the flood would come, its exact timing was paramount for agricultural survival. Too early, and crops would be washed away. Too late, and the land would be parched. This is where the Egyptians' sophisticated timekeeping, particularly their astronomical observations, became a matter of national survival. The key to predicting the Nile's vital rhythm lay in the stars, specifically the star Sopdet, which we know as Sirius, the dog star. You recall its significance from our discussion of star clocks, but here its role transcends mere hour telling. Sopdet was the celestial harbinger of the flood. Its heliacal rising, the first day it became visible in the eastern sky, just before the sun's own appearance, after a period of invisibility, coincided almost perfectly with the beginning of the Nile's inundation. This wasn't just a happy coincidence. It was a cosmic clock for the entire agricultural year. The priests, those meticulous timekeepers, would watch for Sopdet with bated breath. Its reappearance after 70 days of invisibility was a moment of immense celebration and profound significance. It marked the start of the Egyptian New Year, the festival of Wepet Renpet, opening of the year, and the beginning of the Akhet season, the season of inundation. Imagine the collective relief that would sweep across the land when news spread that Sopdet had been seen. It was their most reliable forecast, a divine signal from the heavens that the life-giving waters were on their way. Historians still argue about the precise moment the Egyptians first recognized this profound correlation between Sopdet and the Nile flood. Was it a sudden eureka moment, or a gradual accumulation of observations over centuries? Regardless, its discovery solidified the importance of astronomical timekeeping for the very fabric of Egyptian society. It demonstrated a deep, practical understanding of the cosmos, translating celestial movements into agricultural prosperity. You lean in, picturing the quiet anticipation of the priests, scanning the pre-dawn sky for that single gleaming star. This cosmic alarm clock allowed farmers to prepare their fields, to reinforce irrigation channels, and to move their livestock to higher ground before the waters arrived. It allowed the administrators to organize the distribution of resources and labor in anticipation of the flood's bounty. It wasn't just passive observation, it was active preparation, all orchestrated by the celestial rhythm. Without this precise timekeeping, the ordered agricultural cycles, which were the foundation of their entire economy, would have collapsed into chaos. And here's a quirky tidbit: the flooding of the Nile wasn't always perfectly consistent. While Sopdet's rising was a reliable indicator for the start of the flood season, the actual height and duration of the flood could vary. This led to the development of nilometers, special gauges installed along the riverbanks, often near temples, to measure the exact water level. So, while Sopdet told them when the flood was coming, the nilometer told them how much flood was coming. It's like their combined weather forecast and flood warning system, all in one package. The timing of the Nile flood also influenced the very structure of their civil calendar. Their 365-day year was divided into 3 seasons, each directly linked to the river's cycle: Akhet inundation, Peret growth, and Shemu harvest. These seasons weren't based on solstices or equinoxes in the same way ours are. They were based on the Nile. This shows a civilization whose entire concept of time and annual cycles was intrinsically tied to their geographical reality. Their calendar wasn't just a system for dates, it was a practical guide for survival. The priests, as the primary astronomers, were the interpreters of these vital celestial signs. They maintained meticulous records of Sopdet's appearances and the Nile's flood levels over centuries. This long-term data allowed them to refine their predictions and understand the subtle variations in the river's behavior. It was an ongoing scientific endeavor, a continuous dialogue between humanity and the natural world, mediated by the precision of their timekeeping. You might think that such a reliance on a single star could be risky. What if it was a cloudy night during Sopdet's crucial heliacal rising? That's where their other timekeeping methods came in as backups. While the star was the primary signal, they also observed the general shortening of the day and lengthening of the night as summer approached, using their sundials and clepsydras. But nothing was quite as precise or as celebrated as Sopdet. It was the undisputed champion of flood prediction. The annual flood was so important that it was deified, becoming the god Hapi, the spirit of the Nile's inundation. Timely arrival of the flood, signaled by Sopdet and tracked by the priests, was seen as a blessing from the gods, a confirmation of Matha cosmic order. So, the act of predicting the flood wasn't just a scientific exercise, it was a deeply religious one, connecting the heavens, the river, and the well-being of the Egyptian people. You feel the profound sense of connection these people had to their environment, a reverence for the natural cycles that sustained them. This intertwining of time, astronomy, and agriculture laid the groundwork for Egypt's incredible longevity as a civilization, because they could reliably predict and manage the Nile's floods. They could consistently produce abundant food, which in turn supported a large population, specialized labor, and the development of their magnificent culture. Their timekeeping wasn't a luxury, it was a fundamental pillar of their society, as crucial as the very waters of the Nile. And here's a little joke for you. Imagine a modern meteorologist trying to explain the Nile flood to an ancient Egyptian. Yes, well, the computer models are showing a 70% chance of inundation in late July, give or take a few weeks. Assuming the jet stream doesn't shift, the Egyptian priest would probably just nod politely, thinking, amateurs, we just look for the dog. It certainly puts our weather apps into perspective, doesn't it? The ability to predict the flood also enabled the precise timing of other crucial agricultural activities: when to plow, when to sow seeds into the receding fertile silt, when to harvest the ripened crops. Each phase of the agricultural year was meticulously planned and executed according to the calendar dictated by the river and the stars. This wasn't just guesswork. It was a highly refined system, born from millennia of observation and refined by the precision of their timekeepers. So, as the imaginary waters of the Nile recede from your mind's eye, leaving behind fertile black soil, you understand that ancient Egyptian timekeeping wasn't just an abstract intellectual pursuit. It was a vital, practical necessity underpinning the very existence of their civilization. The priests, with their shadow reading, water watching, and stargazing, weren't just guardians of rituals. They were the guardians of life itself, ensuring that Egypt danced to the predictable, life-giving rhythm of its sacred river. You drift, sensing the ebb and flow of that ancient world, a gentle, timeless current. You've seen how the grand cosmic rhythms, the sun, the water, the stars were meticulously tracked by priests and scholars, primarily to manage the life-giving flow of the Nile. But now, let's bring it down to earth, to the dust and sweat of everyday existence. How did all this sophisticated timekeeping trickle down to the average ancient Egyptian? How did a farmer, a craftsman, a soldier, or a housewife navigate their daily lives when their hours were stretchy and their clocks were shadows or dripping pots? You step into the bustling, noisy streets of a village, the scent of baking bread and donkey dung filling the air, and you imagine their daily routines. For the vast majority of ancient Egyptians, life revolved around the sun. When the sun was up, you worked. When it set, you rested. It was as simple and profound as that. The rhythm of light and dark was the most fundamental timekeeper, ingrained into every aspect of their existence. You wake with the first blush of dawn, the cool pre-sun air stirring. There's no alarm clock, just the subtle shift from dark to light, perhaps the crow of a rooster, or the distant lowing of cattle. Their day, remember, was divided into 12 temporal hours of daylight. For a farmer toiling in the fields, these hours were marked by the sun's position in the sky and the length of the shadows. They wouldn't have a personal sundial strapped to their wrist, but they'd have an intuitive understanding of time based on the sun's altitude. The sun is past its zenith, almost 2 hours until the evening meal. A farmer might think, wiping sweat from their brow. They would use natural markers, the shadow of a particular tree, the way the sunlight hit a specific corner of their hut, or the collective activity of their neighbors. It was a communal clock based on shared observation. Imagine a craftsman in his workshop, perhaps a potter shaping clay on his wheel. He needs consistent light, so he works from dawn till dusk. He knows that when the shadow from the workshop's awning reaches a certain line on the dusty floor, it's time for a break, or for his apprentices to start cleaning up. This wasn't about clocking in and out with absolute precision. It was about efficient workflow and the natural progression of the day. You can almost hear the rhythmic thump of his wheel, synced with the sun's steady march. For those not working outdoors, like bakers or scribes, the concept of daylight hours still held sway. Even indoors, windows or doorways would allow light and shadow to penetrate, providing visual cues. And in more public spaces, like a marketplace, the grand obelisks we discussed earlier would serve as visible public clocks, their immense shadows sweeping across the ground, signaling the general time of day for all to see. It's like their version of the town square clock, but with an extra dose of monumental grandeur. But what about the night? For most, night was for sleeping, but for those with nocturnal duties, like guards, night watchmen, or priests performing rituals, the water clock was invaluable. Imagine a temple guard sitting by a dripping clepsydra, listening to its steady rhythm, knowing that when the water level reaches a certain mark, it's time to change shifts. It's a quiet, hypnotic sound that marks the slow passage of time. In the darkness, historians still argue whether the concept of a workday was as rigid as ours. While there were undoubtedly fixed times for rituals and specific agricultural tasks, the everyday working life for many might have been more fluid, dictated by the immediate task at hand and the availability of light. There wasn't the same pressure of punching the clock or maximizing output per minute. Life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. And here's a quirky tidbit. The Egyptians didn't just measure the day and night. They sometimes marked specific periods for practical reasons. For example, specific hours might be designated for certain types of prayers, for processing grain, or for brewing beer. These were less about universal time and more about task-specific scheduling within a particular trade or household. It's almost like micromanaging your day, but with shadows. The influence of timekeeping on daily life extended beyond work, social gatherings, family meals, and even leisure activities would have been implicitly timed by the sun. Dinner was at dusk, when the shadows grew long and the cool evening air offered respite from the day's heat. Social visits might be planned for the cooler hours of the late afternoon. There was a natural flow, a collective understanding of when things happened. Without needing to consult a wristwatch, education, particularly for scribes and priests, would also have been structured by these temporal hours. Lessons might begin at the 2nd hour of the morning and continue until the 10th hour, with breaks for meals and rest. The disciplined environment of a scribe school would certainly have emphasized adherence to a schedule, even if that schedule was seasonally variable. You can imagine a tired student squinting at the sun through a window, longing for the 11th hour to arrive so he could finally put down his papyrus. One interesting aspect is the lack of universal mechanical clocks. This meant that the experience of time was more personal, more embodied. You didn't just look at a clock. You felt the sun on your skin. You saw the shadow move. You heard the drip of water. Time was a sensory experience, directly connected to the natural world. It wasn't an abstract concept. It was a tangible presence. And a little joke. Imagine a modern person trying to explain daylight saving time to an ancient Egyptian. So you move the sun forward an hour, but only sometimes, and not the actual sun, just the idea of the sun. They'd probably just blink slowly, then offer you a date and a bewildered look. Their system, while flexible, had a certain logical consistency that ours, with its arbitrary shifts, might lack. The cyclical nature of their timekeeping also permeated their worldview. The daily rising and setting of the sun mirrored the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, so central to their religious beliefs. Every day was a small journey from the darkness of night through the light of day and back to the underworld of night. Their temporal hours, therefore, weren't just units of measurement. They were symbolic representations of the cosmic journey. The importance of this deeply ingrained sense of natural time meant that life, while often hard, might have felt less rushed, less driven by artificial deadlines. You moved with the sun, with the seasons, with the river. There was an inherent connection to the rhythms of the earth that we, in our digitally saturated, hyper-scheduled lives, often lose. You breathe deeply, feeling the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, a small internal clock ticking away. So, while the grand calculations and monumental sundials were the domain of the elite, the effects of that timekeeping permeated every stratum of ancient Egyptian society. It structured their work, their leisure, their spiritual lives, and their very understanding of existence. The daily march of the sun, the quiet drip of water, the silent dance of the stars. These were the invisible threads that wove together the fabric of ancient Egyptian daily life, allowing millions to live, work, and thrive in harmony with their environment. You nod slowly, imagining the unhurried, purposeful flow of an ordinary day, so different, yet so profoundly human. You've delved into the daily rhythms, the temporal hours dictated by sun, water, and stars. But the Egyptians didn't just measure the fleeting moments. They had a profound grasp of the larger cycles, the grand sweep of the year. And nowhere is this more evident than in their 3 distinct seasons, which weren't simply spring, summer, and autumn like ours. No, their seasons were inextricably linked to the lifeblood of their civilization, the Nile River, Akhet, Peret, and Shemu. You sense the shift in the air, the subtle change in the light, as you imagine these distinct phases shaping the very fabric of ancient Egyptian existence. Let's start with Akhet, the inundation. Imagine the parched, cracked earth of summer. The sun beats down relentlessly, and the Nile, though still flowing, is low. Then, sometime around late July or early August, signaled by the heliacal rising of Sopdet Sirius, the river begins to swell. This isn't just a gentle rise, it's a monumental event. The Nile overflows its banks, not in a destructive torrent, but in a slow, controlled spreading, depositing nutrient-rich black silt across the floodplains. This season, Akhet typically lasted from July to November for the ancient Egyptians. Akhet was a period of both anticipation and renewal. While the fields were submerged, agricultural work paused. This wasn't a time of idleness, however. It was a period for maintenance, for building projects, for religious festivals, and for planning the coming agricultural year. It was also a time when many farmers, freed from immediate fieldwork, might have been conscripted for monumental state projects like pyramid or temple construction. You can almost hear the rhythmic chants of laborers, their work timed by the length of shadows on the vast building sites. This season highlights the Egyptians' incredible adaptation to their environment. Instead of fighting the flood, they embraced it, understanding its vital role in replenishing the soil. Their entire calendar was a testament to this symbiotic relationship. The precise timing of Akhet, predicted by their astronomical observations and monitored by nilometers, was the linchpin of their survival. Historians still argue about the exact methods farmers used to determine when the waters had receded enough for planting. Was it purely visual, or did they have specific measurements of soil moisture? It speaks to a deep, intimate knowledge of their land. Following the slow recession of the floodwaters came Peret, the season of growth or emergence. Imagine the land now, transformed. The rich, black silt left behind by the flood makes the soil incredibly fertile. This was the time for sowing seeds. From approximately November to March, the fields would be abuzz with activity. Farmers would work tirelessly, plowing the soft, moist earth, scattering barley, wheat, and flax seeds, often using simple, animal-drawn plows, or even just broadcasting the seeds by hand. You feel the satisfaction of fertile earth beneath your feet, the promise of abundance in the air. Peret was a time of hopeful waiting, of careful irrigation as the crops grew. The sun, tracked by their sundials, would dictate the daily rhythm of tending the fields. The clepsydra might time the night watches, ensuring crops were protected or particular irrigation channels opened at the correct moment. This season was a testament to the Egyptians' agricultural prowess, their ability to harness the gifts of the Nile and turn them into sustenance for millions. It was during Peret that the vast majority of Egypt's food supply was cultivated, laying the foundation for their prosperity. And here's a quirky tidbit. The ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated irrigation techniques to manage the floodwaters. During Peret, they didn't just rely on the natural inundation. They built canals, dikes, and basins to control and distribute the water effectively. This required not only engineering skill, but also meticulous timekeeping to know when to open and close sluice gates, when to divert water to specific fields, ensuring every patch of fertile land received its share. It's an ancient water ballet, choreographed by the sun and the flow. Finally, we arrive at Shemu, the harvest season. As the crops ripened under the increasingly intense sun, from roughly March to July, the focus shifted entirely to gathering the bounty. This was the busiest time of the year, a frenzy of activity, as entire communities mobilized to bring in the harvest before the next flood. Imagine the sight: vast fields of golden wheat, Workers swinging sickles, children gleaning. What was left behind, all under the watchful eye of the sun? You can almost hear the joyful chatter, the rustle of dry stalks, the collective sigh of relief as the granaries begin to fill. Shemu was also the hottest and driest season, with the Nile at its lowest. The reliance on sundials would be absolute. As the days grew long and the sun beat down, the end of Shemu brought a period of scarcity and hardship, as the stored grain dwindled and people waited anxiously for the return of the flood and the new agricultural cycle. This period, before the heliacal rising of Sopdet, was a true test of their planning and foresight. It highlights the profound cyclical nature of their lives, a constant ebb and flow of abundance and scarcity dictated by the river. A little joke for you. Imagine an ancient Egyptian farmer trying to explain crop rotation to a modern city dweller. No, you don't grow beans after the wheat. You wait for the entire river to come and fertilize it all over again. It's much more efficient, trust me. It certainly puts our intensive farming methods into perspective, doesn't it? The civil calendar, a 365-day year, was divided into these 3 seasons, each consisting of 4 months of 30 days, totaling 360 days. The remaining 5 days were added at the end of the year, called the epagomenal days, which we'll explore soon. This calendar, while not perfectly aligning with the solar year, it slowly drifted relative to the actual seasons by about a quarter day each year, was incredibly practical for managing their agricultural and administrative affairs. It was a brilliant administrative tool, even with its slight seasonal drift over centuries. This system of 3 seasons, dictated by the Nile, meant that their concept of time was fundamentally agricultural. Unlike cultures that might mark time by religious festivals or lunar cycles alone, the Egyptians' primary clock was the river itself. Every aspect of their society, from labor to leisure, from religious festivals to royal decrees, was ultimately synchronized with the Nile's annual rhythm. It's a deep, organic connection to their environment, a testament to their ability to thrive in a challenging landscape. The meticulous record-keeping of the priests, noting the exact timing of the Nile's rise and fall, allowed them to refine their understanding of these seasons. They understood that while the overall pattern was consistent, there were variations year to year. This foresight, based on their timekeeping and observation, was a cornerstone of Egypt's remarkable stability and prosperity over thousands of years. They truly lived by the river's clock, a profound example of environmental adaptation. So, as you reflect on Akhet, Peret, and Shemu, you realize that the Egyptians' timekeeping wasn't just about dividing hours or days. It was about understanding and living within the grand, life-giving cycles of their land. It was a calendar born from the river, guided by the stars, and managed by human ingenuity. You feel the subtle shift in your own perception of time, understanding how deeply human life can be intertwined with the natural world, a timeless rhythm echoing through the millennia. You've witnessed the grand sweep of the Nile's seasons, the very backbone of the Egyptian year. Now, let's zoom in on a single star, Sopdet. You turn your gaze upwards once more, imagining the velvety blackness of the pre-dawn sky over ancient Egypt. Sopdet, known to us as Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, was more than just a navigational beacon. It was the ultimate celestial clock for the most important event of their year, The story of Sopdet begins with its disappearance. For about 70 days each year, from late May to early August, Sirius is too close to the sun to be seen in the night sky. It essentially vanishes from view. This period was not just a blank spot on the calendar. It was often seen as a time of mourning or anticipation. The land would be dry, the Nile low, and the heat intense. It was a time of waiting, of quiet reliance on the predictable return of the life-giving waters. Then the magic happened. Sometime around late July or early August, just before the sun's first rays illuminated the eastern horizon, Sopdet would reappear, a brilliant, shimmering point of light, visible for only a few fleeting moments before being swallowed by the dawn. This event, known as the Heliacal Rising, was absolutely monumental. It wasn't just a pretty sight. It was the definitive signal that the Nile flood was imminent, a promise of renewal and abundance. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief, the shouts of joy that would have erupted across the land. The Heliacal Rising of Sopdet was so significant that it marked the beginning of the Egyptian civil year, the first day of the season of Akhet inundation. This day, Wipat Renpet, the opening of the year, was a major festival celebrated with pomp and ceremony. It symbolized rebirth, fertility, and the continuation of divine order. Imagine the priests, those meticulous timekeepers, standing on temple roofs or special observation platforms, scanning the horizon night after night, their hearts pounding with anticipation, waiting for that first glorious glimpse. Historians still argue about how precisely which could be obscured by local conditions or atmospheric haze, or was there a more generalized calculation based on average observations? Regardless, the concept of Sopdet as the true calendar marker was deeply ingrained. It provided a fixed, natural anchor for their entire civil calendar, far more reliable than the fluctuating moon cycles or the less distinct solar solstices for agricultural timing. This reliance on Sopdet meant that the priests who tracked its movements were among the most powerful and respected figures in Egyptian society. Their astronomical knowledge wasn't academic, it was existential. They were the bridge between the heavens and the earthly prosperity of Egypt. They kept the meticulous records, observed the cycles year after year, and ensured that the sacred calendar was aligned with this divine stellar clock. You feel the weight of their responsibility, the almost unbearable pressure to get it right. A quirky tidbit: the ancient Egyptians believed that Sopdet was the soul of the goddess Isis, and its annual reappearance was linked to the tears of Isis mourning for Osiris, which then caused the Nile to flood. So, the scientific observation of a star was wrapped in a profound myth, blending astronomy with spirituality, practicality with poetry. It's a beautiful example of how they integrated their understanding of the natural world with their religious beliefs. The 365-day civil calendar, while beginning with Sopdet's Heliacal Rising, was slightly shorter than the true solar year, which is approximately 365.25 days. This meant that over time, the civil calendar would slowly drift out of sync with the actual solar year and the Heliacal Rising of Sopdet. Every 4 years, the calendar would be off by approximately 1 day. Over 1,460 years, which they called a Sothic cycle, after Sopdet's Greek name, Sothis, the civil calendar would complete a full cycle, meaning the heliacal rising of Sopdet would again align with the first day of the civil year. This slow drift wasn't seen as an error, but rather a slow, grand cosmic dance. This concept of the Sothic cycle is a testament to their long-term astronomical observation and record-keeping. They understood this drift, even if they didn't implement a leap year system to correct it in their civil calendar for everyday use. They did, however, have religious calendars that likely accounted for it, more precisely for certain festivals. It meant that while the priests knew the true astronomical year, the everyday calendar would slowly shift. Is it really the season of Akhet, or is the calendar just saying it's Akhet? But the river hasn't actually started to rise yet because of the Sothic drift. It certainly adds a layer of delightful complication to their planning, doesn't it? Perhaps that's why they were so renowned for their patience. However, provided an invaluable anchor. Even if the calendar shifted, the star did not. It was the ultimate constant, the celestial guarantor of the Nile's bounty. It allowed them to plan not just for the immediate year, but for long-term agricultural strategies, ensuring food security for millennia. This precise celestial timekeeping was the engine of their sustained civilization. The cult of Sopdet was significant, reflecting the star's crucial role. Statues and temples were sometimes aligned to capture its rising light on specific days. The goddess Sopdet was often depicted as a cow, symbolizing fertility and nourishment, or as a woman with a star on her head, directly linking her to the celestial body. Her worship underscored the profound connection between the heavens, the river, and the prosperity of the land. So, while their daily lives were structured by the sun and water clocks, the grand overarching rhythm of their existence, the very pulse of their civilization, was dictated by a single brilliant star. Sopdet's yearly reappearance was a moment of profound cosmic revelation, a signal from the heavens that the cycle of life would continue. It was the ultimate reassurance, a celestial promise whispered across the pre-dawn sky. You feel a deep sense of reverence, understanding how a distant point of light could hold such immense power over the fate of millions. You've seen the grand celestial clock of Sopdet dictating the rhythm of the Nile and the yearly cycles it ushered in. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most curious and delightful quirks of the ancient Egyptian calendar, the 5 epagomenal days. Imagine a year ticking along perfectly, month after month, each with its neat 30 days, and then, poof, 5 extra days just appear at the end. You sense a slight chuckle escaping your lips as you contemplate this ancient calendrical oddity. So, the standard Egyptian civil calendar, the one we've been discussing, had 12 months, each with 30 days. That adds up to a tidy 360 days. But as even the most casual observer would notice, the actual solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun, is roughly 365.25 days. The Egyptians, those meticulous sky watchers, knew this. They couldn't just ignore those extra 5 days. So, what did they do? They simply tacked them onto the end of the year. After the 12th month, and before the heliacal rising of Sopdet and the start of the new year, these 5 days were known as the epagomenal days, from the Greek word epagomenai, meaning added on. In ancient Egyptian, they were often called the days upon the year, or the 5 days over the year. They were unique, set apart from the regular months, and held a very special, almost mystical significance. They were considered unlucky, liminal, a time when the normal rules of the universe might be slightly suspended. You can almost feel the air growing a little thick, a little strange. During these peculiar days, this is where the mythology truly intertwines with the timekeeping. According to a prominent Egyptian myth, these 5 days were the birthdays of 5 crucial deities: Osiris, Horus, the elder, sometimes considered a distinct god from Horus, the son of Isis, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. The myth goes that the sky goddess Nut was forbidden by Ra to give birth on any day of the year. Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and, importantly, time, gambled with the moon god, Khonsu, for a portion of his light. He won enough light to create 5 extra days outside the regular calendar on which Nut could give birth to her children. Without violating Ra's decree, this myth provided a divine justification for these extra days, giving them a sacred, if somewhat unsettling, character. Because they were born in defiance of Ra's original decree, and because of the tumultuous lives of these gods, especially the rivalry between Osiris and Set, the epagomenal days were often seen as a period of ill omen. People might avoid starting new ventures, signing important contracts, or even traveling during these days. It was a time to be cautious, to lay low, to not tempt fate. You can imagine the elderly women in the village cautioning their grandchildren, "Don't go near the river. On an epagomenal day, dearie, the crocodiles are extra grumpy." Historians still argue about whether the myth of Thoth creating these days predates the astronomical discovery of the 365.25-day year, or if the myth was created to explain the empirically observed need for these extra days. Regardless, the two became inextricably linked, reinforcing the cultural significance of this calendrical anomaly. It points to a society that sought to find divine meaning in every aspect of their world, even in the slight discrepancy of their calendar, a quirky tidbit. Despite their ominous reputation, the epagomenal days were still sometimes used for certain administrative purposes, or for specific religious rituals that were explicitly tied to the birthdays of the deities. So, while they were unlucky for some things, they were divinely auspicious for others. It adds a delicious layer of complexity to their scheduling, doesn't it? You had to know your myths as well as your calendar to navigate these days. These 5 days also served a very practical purpose. They brought their administrative calendar closer to the actual solar year. While the quarter-day discrepancy meant a slow drift over centuries, the Sothic cycle we discussed, the inclusion of the 5 epagomenal days allowed their 365-day year to remain remarkably stable and useful for agricultural planning and governmental administration over long periods. It was a brilliant, simple solution to a complex astronomical problem, achieved without the need for complex leap year calculations every 4 years. Think about the impact on daily life. For 360 days, life had a predictable rhythm. Then, for 5 days, things shifted. It's like having a week-long public holiday that everyone also thinks is a little cursed. People would likely prepare for them, perhaps stocking up on supplies, avoiding major undertakings, and engaging in more introspective activities. It was a pause, a breath, before the grand renewal of the new year, ushered in by Sopdet and the Nile flood. And a little joke. Imagine trying to schedule a party in ancient Egypt. Oh, that sounds wonderful. But is it on one of the epagomenal days? Because if so, Aunt Imhotep simply will not attend. She thinks the spirits are particularly mischievous then. And honestly, last year's cake just ... disintegrated. It certainly adds a unique flavor to party planning. The existence of these 5 extra days also speaks to the Egyptian understanding of the cosmos as a finely balanced system. They recognized the slight imperfection in their neat 360-day calendar and found a way to accommodate it. Not just practically, but also mythologically. It demonstrates their intellectual curiosity and their profound desire to reconcile the observable world with their spiritual beliefs. The epagomenal days provided a crucial buffer for their calendar. Without them, the civil calendar would have quickly drifted out of sync with the seasons, making agricultural planning chaotic. By adding these days, they effectively created a calendar that, while not perfect, was sufficiently accurate for millennia, allowing for the stable functioning of their vast and complex civilization. It was a pragmatic and poetic solution rolled into one. Historians also ponder the social implications of these unlucky days. Did it foster a sense of collective superstition? Did it provide a convenient excuse for procrastination? I'll start that project after the epagomenal days, just to be safe. It certainly added a distinctive cultural flavor to the end of their year, making it a period set apart from the ordinary flow of time. So, as you envision those 5 strange, liminal days, nestled between the old year and the new, you appreciate the unique genius of the ancient Egyptians. They didn't just measure time, they mythologized it, infused it with divine meaning, and adapted it to fit both the celestial realities and the practical needs of their earthly existence. The epagomenal days are a perfect microcosm of their holistic approach to time, a blend of observation, practicality, and profound spiritual belief. Breathe a slow, gentle breath, feeling the quiet strangeness of those in-between days before the grand cycle begins anew. You've journeyed through the Nile's seasons, lingered in the light of Sopdet, and even embraced the quirky magic of the epagomenal days. Now, let's widen our lens beyond the immediate banks of the Nile. The influence of ancient Egypt's innovative timekeeping wasn't confined to its own borders. Far from it. Its methods, its philosophies, and its calendrical systems rippled outwards, inspiring and informing civilizations across the ancient world. You envision the bustling trade routes, the scholarly exchanges, as Egyptian ideas subtly, yet powerfully spread. Think about the Mediterranean world in antiquity. Egypt was a beacon of knowledge, a sophisticated civilization with millennia of accumulated wisdom. Traders, scholars, and even conquerors traveled to Egypt, not just for its material wealth, but for its intellectual treasures. And among those treasures was their advanced understanding of time and astronomy. The precise, solar-based 365-day calendar, with its consistent months and epagomenal days, was a marvel of administrative and astronomical foresight compared to the often chaotic and less predictable lunar calendars prevalent in many other regions. One of the most significant impacts was on the Roman world. When Julius Caesar embarked on his calendar reform in 45 BCE, he turned to Egyptian astronomical knowledge. Sosigenes of Alexandria, an Egyptian astronomer, was instrumental in designing the Julian calendar. This calendar, which introduced a leap day every 4 years to account for the quarter-day discrepancy, was essentially a refinement of the Egyptian 365-day civil calendar. You can almost see Caesar in his toga, listening intently to suggestions, recognizing the superior logic of the Egyptian system over the unwieldy and often politically manipulated Roman lunar calendar. This adoption by the Romans was a game-changer. The Julian calendar became the dominant calendar throughout the Roman Empire, and subsequently the foundation for the Gregorian calendar we use today. So, when you look at your calendar app or mark a date, you are, in a very real sense, using a system with direct lineage back to the ancient Egyptian priests who meticulously tracked the sun and Sopdet. It's a subtle, yet profound, legacy. A ripple effect across millennia. Historians still argue about the extent to which other Mediterranean cultures independently developed similar timekeeping methods versus directly borrowing from Egypt. While some parallels undoubtedly arose from common observational needs, the sophistication and administrative utility of the Egyptian system made it particularly attractive for adoption and adaptation. The sheer longevity and stability of the Egyptian calendar spoke volumes about its effectiveness. Consider the Greeks. Many prominent Greek thinkers, like Herodotus and Plato, traveled to Egypt seeking knowledge, while Greek astronomy developed its own unique trajectory. It was undoubtedly informed by Egyptian observations, particularly regarding the movements of stars and the length of the year. The very concept of celestial mechanics and the idea of dividing the day and night into regular segments might have found fertile ground for development after exposure to Egyptian practices. You can imagine a wide-eyed Greek philosopher, amazed by the precision of a temple's sundial or a clepsydra, taking notes furiously. A quirky tidbit: the Greeks themselves developed sophisticated water clocks, some even more complex than the Egyptian originals, incorporating gears and mechanisms to show various astronomical cycles. However, the fundamental principle of using water flow for time measurement was undoubtedly inspired by the earlier Egyptian innovation. It's like the Egyptians provided the basic recipe, and the Greeks added some extra spices and a fancy presentation. Beyond direct calendrical influence, the Egyptians' approach to time, deeply rooted in astronomical observation and the cyclical nature of the cosmos, offered a powerful worldview. This perspective, where the orderly progression of time was linked to divine order and cosmic harmony, resonated with philosophical and religious systems across the ancient world. The idea that understanding time was key to understanding the universe was a profound concept that transcended geographical boundaries. The very concept of dividing the day into precise hours, even if temporal ones, was an innovation that other cultures eventually adopted and refined. Before the widespread use of sundials, many societies relied on far more imprecise methods, like first light, mid-morning, or last light. The Egyptian drive for more granular timekeeping, motivated by administrative and ritual needs, helped set a new standard. It subtly pushed other cultures towards greater temporal precision. The widespread use of sundials, for example, traveled beyond Egypt. Roman sundials, many of which can still be seen in archaeological sites today, clearly show the influence of Egyptian design, particularly the gnomon and the marked lines. Even the technology of the clepsydra found its way into Greek and Roman society, evolving into more complex and, eventually, alarm-equipped devices. It's a quiet technological diffusion where the humble shadow and the steady drip became universal. Time-telling principles. Historians still debate the precise mechanisms of this cultural exchange. Was it primarily through trade, where ideas were exchanged along with goods? Was it through military conquest, where victorious empires adopted the best practices of those they conquered? Or was it through the deliberate efforts of scholars who sought out Egyptian wisdom? Likely, it was a combination of all these factors, a complex web of interactions that spread intellectual seeds across the ancient world. And a little joke. Imagine an Egyptian priest visiting another culture, patiently trying to explain the Sothic cycle to someone who barely knows what day it is. No, you see, the star Sopdet ... and then the 365-day year, and then over 1460 years, it all realigns. It's very simple, really. The other person would probably just nod vaguely and offer them a large glass of wine. The legacy of Egyptian timekeeping extends even to our modern fascination with ancient knowledge. The alignments of the pyramids with cardinal directions, the precise placement of temples to capture specific solar rays, enduring mysteries continue to captivate us, underscoring the deep astronomical knowledge that underpinned their entire civilization. Their timekeeping wasn't just practical, it was monumental, woven into the very landscape of their legacy. So, as you reflect on the global reach of Egyptian timekeeping, you realize that their contribution wasn't just about the invention of specific devices. It was about developing a systematic, observant approach to understanding and managing time itself. They provided the foundational concepts and tools that later civilizations would build upon, refine, and eventually transmit down to us. When you glance at your watch or check the date on your phone, you are, in a very real sense, standing on the shoulders of ancient Egyptian giants. You feel a deep connection to that timeless stream of knowledge flowing through history. You've traced the ripples of Egyptian timekeeping across ancient civilizations, a testament to their enduring intellectual prowess. Now, let's bring it back to where those ripples began, to the very heart of their monumental achievements, particularly the pyramids. You stand before the colossal structures at Giza, feeling the sheer weight of millennia, and you begin to see them not just as tombs or symbols of power, but as incredibly precise, gigantic instruments of time and cosmic alignment. The construction of the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, remains one of humanity's most astonishing feats of engineering and organization. And at the core of this monumental undertaking was an extraordinary understanding of time, astronomy, and cardinal directions. These weren't just big piles of stone. They were precision-aligned monuments that whispered secrets of the cosmos to those who knew how to listen. Imagine the builders of the Great Pyramid some 4,500 years ago to align a structure of that scale so perfectly with true north, south, east, and west without modern instruments is mind-boggling. This level of precision speaks directly to their mastery of astronomical timekeeping. They used the stars, specifically circumpolar stars, stars that never set below the horizon, to establish their cardinal points. Here's how they likely did it. They would have chosen two stars that rotated around the celestial North Pole. At a certain point in their rotation. These two stars would align vertically, one directly above the other. Using a plumb bob or a sighting mechanism, they would carefully mark the exact moment this alignment occurred. A straight line drawn from their observation point through this alignment would give them true north. This observation had to be done with incredible patience and precision, perhaps repeatedly over several nights, to ensure accuracy. You can almost feel the still, cool air of the desert night, the focused silence of the observers. Historians still argue about the exact pair of stars they used. Was it Kokab and Mizar, or perhaps Thuban, which was closer to the celestial pole during the Old Kingdom? Regardless of the specific stars, the principle remains. They used the unchanging rotation of the heavens as their ultimate compass and clock. This method of finding true north was far more accurate than relying on a magnetic compass which they didn't have, or even the sun's shadow alone. As the sun's true east-west path varies slightly throughout the year, the precision of the Great Pyramid's alignment is astounding. It's oriented to true north with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree. To put that into perspective, it's more accurate than some modern buildings. This wasn't accidental. It was the result of deliberate, meticulous, astronomical observation and timekeeping. The very foundation of these colossal structures was laid with a profound understanding of celestial mechanics. A quirky tidbit: some theories suggest that the precise timing of the vernal equinox was also used in the final alignment of the pyramids. On the equinox, the sun rises exactly due east and sets exactly due west. By observing the shadow of a gnomon or stake throughout the day on the equinox, they could find a perfect east-west line, which Peret, when crossed with their established north-south line, would give them a precise square base for the pyramid. It's like a grand cosmic square and compass, used to build architectural wonders. But beyond simple alignment, the very construction process itself was a monumental exercise in time management. Thousands of workers quarrying, transporting, and precisely placing millions of massive stone blocks all had to be coordinated. This required daily timekeeping, knowing when to start work at dawn, when to break for meals, and when to stop as the sun dipped. The supervisors, likely using the familiar T-shaped sundials, or even just the shadow of an existing structure, would have managed these daily rhythms. Imagine the sheer logistical challenge: materials arriving from distant quarries, thousands of laborers organized into shifts, each task needing to be completed within a specific time frame. The timekeeping system we've explored, the flexible daylight hours, the water clocks for supervisors working at night or indoors, would have been absolutely crucial. Without it, the entire project would descend into chaos. You can almost hear the shouts of overseers, the rhythmic thud of mallets, all regulated by the invisible hand of time. Historians still argue about the precise methods of work organization on such projects. Was it a continuous workday from dawn to dusk, or were there more structured shifts? The evidence suggests a highly disciplined environment, where the passage of hours was carefully managed to maximize efficiency. The very existence of these grand monuments is a testament not just to their architectural vision, but to their unparalleled ability to coordinate immense human effort through effective time management. The pyramids, like the obelisks, also served as gigantic sundials in their own right. As the sun moved, the pyramid itself would cast an enormous, ever-changing shadow across the desert floor. While perhaps not used for precise daily timekeeping by the general populace, these shadows would have served as majestic visual cues for the time of day and the progress of the seasons. On certain dates, particularly the equinoxes and solstices, the shadows and light patterns on the pyramid faces might have created specific, observable phenomena, emphasizing their cosmic connection. A little joke. Imagine a pyramid foreman trying to explain a delay. Well, the shadow wasn't quite where it should be this morning, so we figured the gods were telling us to sleep in. Can't argue with celestial signs, can you? It definitely adds a unique flavor to their project management meetings. The Giza Plateau itself, with its 3 main pyramids, is thought by some scholars to reflect the alignment of the stars in Orion's belt. While this remains a subject of considerable scholarly debate, it highlights the enduring fascination with the deep astronomical and temporal connections embedded within these structures. Even if not a precise star map, the desire to align with the heavens was undeniable. The act of building the pyramids was, in itself, an act of time. It was a project spanning decades, often an entire pharaoh's reign. This long-term planning, the ability to conceive of and execute a project that would outlast generations of builders, speaks to a deeply ingrained understanding of historical time and legacy. Their timekeeping wasn't just about the here and now, it was about eternity. So, as you stand in the shadow of these ancient wonders, feeling the immense presence of the past, you realize that the pyramids are more than just stone monuments. They are silent testaments to the ancient Egyptians' profound mastery of time, astronomy, and organization. Every precisely cut block, every perfectly aligned angle, every grand shadow cast, whispers a story of a civilization that understood, perhaps better than any before or since, how to live in harmony with the cosmos, translating its rhythms into enduring masterpieces. You breathe slowly, feeling the weight of millennia, a gentle, timeless pressure. You've marveled at the monumental scale of timekeeping embedded within the pyramids, a silent testament to ancient ingenuity. Now, let's bring it back down to a more human scale, returning to the humble sundial itself. It might seem like a simple device, but the sundial, from its earliest stake-into-ground iteration, underwent subtle yet significant evolutions over millennia, reflecting a continuous quest for greater accuracy and utility. You imagine the tinkerer, the curious mind, always striving to make the shadows whisper just a little clearer. From the basic T-shaped sundial that gave approximate hours, the Egyptians, and later those influenced by them, began to refine the instrument. The earliest forms were designed for specific latitudes, and often had markings that were accurate only for certain times of the year, due to the variable length of their temporal hours. This wasn't a flaw in their understanding, but a feature of their chosen system. However, as the desire for precision grew, so too did the complexity of the sundial. One key refinement was the introduction of a gnomon that was not perpendicular to the base, but instead tilted to point towards the celestial pole. This innovation, though more commonly associated with later Greek and Roman sundials, was a logical extension of astronomical understanding that was certainly present in Egypt. by tilting the gnomon, the sundial could, in theory, divide the day into more uniform or equinoxial hours, hours that remained the same length throughout the year, like our modern 60-minute hours. This was a significant conceptual leap, moving from a flexible nature-bound hour to a more abstract, fixed unit of time. Imagine the experimentation involved. Someone, perhaps a particularly frustrated priest, trying to time a ritual with exactitude across different seasons, might have noticed that if the gnomon was angled just so, the shadow's movement became more predictable. This wasn't something discovered overnight. It was the result of countless hours of observation, trial and error, and a deep understanding of the sun's annual path across the sky. You picture a diligent Egyptian astronomer painstakingly adjusting a gnomon, meticulously marking its shadow day after day, year after year, until the patterns revealed themselves. Historians still argue about the precise timeline for the adoption of the tilted gnomon in Egypt. While the earliest surviving Egyptian sundials mostly feature the perpendicular T-shape, later periods, especially under Roman influence, certainly incorporated more sophisticated designs. Was the idea imported, or did it evolve independently from their own advanced astronomical knowledge? It's a fascinating chicken and egg question, highlighting the interconnectedness of ancient intellectual traditions. Another evolutionary step involved the shape of the sundial's surface. Instead of just a flat plane, some later sundials were curved, often concave. This curved surface allowed for more accurate readings throughout the day, as it could better compensate for the sun's changing altitude and the non-linear movement of the shadow, especially in the early morning and late afternoon. It's like designing a specialized lens for the sun's light, making the shadow's message clearer. These were not mass-produced items. Each would have been a finely crafted instrument, often tailored to its specific location and purpose. A quirky tidbit: some very elaborate Roman sundials, building on earlier principles, even had multiple gnomons, or complex shapes to show different types of hours, temporal and equinoctial, or to work in different seasons. Imagine the sheer dedication to timekeeping to create such a complex device, a true testament to the intellectual curiosity surrounding horology. It almost feels like they were obsessed with time in a wonderful, ancient way. The transition from strictly temporal hours to more uniform equinoctial hours was a slow but significant shift in the concept of time itself. As trade increased and different cultures interacted, a more standardized measure of time became increasingly useful for commerce and administration. While the Egyptians maintained their temporal hours for a very long time, the conceptual groundwork for uniform hours was laid by their precise astronomical observations and the eventual refinement of the sundial. Think about the societal implications. A shift to uniform hours means that an hour in the morning is the same length as an hour in the afternoon, regardless of the season. This makes scheduling far more predictable and less reliant on intuitive knowledge of the sun's position. It's the move from a fluid, organic concept of time to a more rigid, mathematical one, paving the way for mechanical clocks thousands of years later. And a little joke: imagine an ancient Egyptian trying to explain equinoctial hours to a farmer who's only ever known temporal hours. So, the sun moves slower in the morning now. Or are we just pretending it does? The farmer would probably just scratch his head, muttering about city folk and their complicated notions. The development of the sundial wasn't just about technological advancement. It also reflected an evolving understanding of the cosmos. As their astronomical knowledge deepened, so too did their ability to represent the sun's movements accurately on a static surface. It was a continuous feedback loop. Better observations led to better sundials, which in turn allowed for even more refined observations. Even the portable sundials, those little T-shaped wonders, saw their own subtle evolutions. Some might have featured more elaborate scales, or perhaps even a small plumb bob to ensure the device was held perfectly level for accurate readings. Others were incorporated into larger objects, like architectural elements or even tomb furnishings, blending utility with artistic expression. Historians still debate the extent of truly uniform hour usage in everyday ancient Egypt. While the concept was certainly understood and applied in some contexts, particularly for astronomy and mathematics, the temporal hour system remained prevalent for much of their history for general daily life. It points to a cultural preference, a comfort with a time system that inherently flexed with the natural world rather than imposing a rigid structure upon it. The very persistence of the sundial, even after the invention of water clocks, shows its enduring utility and appeal. It was simple, reliable when the sun shone, and directly connected to the divine power of the sun god Ra. It was a visible, tangible representation of the cosmic order unfolding before their eyes. So, as you watch the imaginary sundial's shadow slowly traverse its markings, you appreciate that its evolution was not a sudden leap, but a gradual, painstaking process of refinement. Each subtle change, each new marking, each adjustment to the gnomon represented a deepening understanding of the sun's movements and a step closer to the precise uniform hours we take for granted today. It's a quiet story of human curiosity and ingenuity etched in stone and shadow, a testament to the persistent human drive to tame the elusive beast of time. You breathe a slow, soft breath, feeling the patient march of progress echoing through the ages. You've journeyed with the sun, heard the drip of water, watched the silent dance of the stars, and seen the ingenious ways the ancient Egyptians measured time. From the grand obelisks that cast their colossal shadows to the subtle, almost mystical, epagomenal days, their timekeeping was a symphony of observation, practicality, and profound spiritual belief. Now, as our journey through their temporal world draws to a close, let's consider the echoes of their innovations in our own lives, how their ancient wisdom subtly, yet undeniably, shapes the very fabric of our modern world. Think about the fundamental units of time we use every single day. The 24-hour day, the division of the day into hours, the 365-day year. These are not arbitrary numbers. They are direct descendants, refined and adjusted over millennia of the calendrical and astronomical systems first developed in ancient Egypt. When you glance at your watch or check the date on your phone, you are, in a very real sense, interacting with a legacy that began on the banks of the Nile, under the watchful eye of their priest-astronomers. The concept of a civil year of 365 days, for example, which the Egyptians established based on their observations of the sun and Sopdet, became the cornerstone of the Julian and then the Gregorian calendars, while we added the leap year to account for the quarter-day discrepancy. The fundamental length of the year, that stable cycle around the sun, was their profound insight. Imagine trying to run a global society without a consistent, widely accepted calendar chaos, wouldn't it be? The Egyptians gave us the framework for that order. And what about the division of the day into hours? While their temporal hours were flexible, the very idea of segmenting the day and night into 12 units each, for a total of 24, even if they didn't conceptually combine them into one continuous 24-hour period in the same way we do, laid the groundwork for our modern system. It was an initial, practical attempt to quantify the passage of time in a granular way, moving beyond vague concepts like mid-morning or late afternoon. You can almost hear their ancient voices in the quiet click of a minute hand. Historians still argue about the precise paths of influence and independent invention in the history of horology. However, the consistent presence of advanced timekeeping in ancient Egypt, spanning millennia, makes it an undeniable wellspring of innovation, from their sundials evolving into more precise instruments in later civilizations, to their water clocks serving as precursors to complex mechanical devices. The lineage is clear. Their intellectual curiosity about time was truly foundational. Consider the role of astronomy in daily life. For the ancient Egyptians, the heavens weren't just a distant spectacle. They were a living clock, a calendar, and a guide for agriculture and religion. While our modern lives are often disconnected from the direct observation of the stars for time, the science of astronomy, which underpins our own GPS systems, satellite communications, and weather predictions, has its roots in these ancient observations, the very act of looking up and finding meaning in the celestial dance that started with them. A quirky tidbit: the ancient Egyptian concept of mat, or cosmic order and balance, was deeply intertwined with their understanding of time. The regular, predictable cycles of the sun, moon, and stars, and the precise timing of the Nile flood, were all seen as manifestations of mat. So, when they measured time, they weren't just being practical. They were participating in the maintenance of universal harmony. It's a beautifully holistic approach to time, far grander than merely keeping appointments. Even our language around time carries faint echoes. We still speak of the sun rising and setting, of the hours of the day, of the phases of the moon. These are direct sensory observations, just as they were for the Egyptians, who based their entire system on what they could see and experience in the natural world. Our abstract numbers and digital displays simplify it, but the underlying phenomena are the same. You feel the sun on your face, even now, and sense that timeless connection. The engineering prowess required for their monumental alignments, like the pyramids oriented to true north, still inspires awe. This required not just abstract mathematical knowledge, but precise, practical timekeeping through stellar observation. Modern surveying and construction techniques, while using different tools, still rely on these fundamental principles of accurate measurement and alignment, principles that were mastered thousands of years ago on the sands of Egypt. And a little joke: if an ancient Egyptian timekeeper magically appeared today, they might be utterly bewildered by our obsession with exact minutes and seconds. Why so fast does the sun rush here? And why do you all stare at these glowing rectangles instead of the actual sky? They'd probably think we'd lost our way, trading the grandeur of cosmic rhythms for the tyranny of the digital tick. The ancient Egyptians taught us that time is not just a linear progression, but a series of interconnected cycles. The daily cycle of light and dark, the monthly cycle of the moon, the yearly cycle of the seasons, and the grand, slow, Sothic cycle of the stars. All were understood and integrated into their worldview. This cyclical understanding often fostered a sense of patience and endurance, an acceptance of the ebb and flow of life, rather than a frantic race against the clock. In a world increasingly driven by instantaneous communication and relentless scheduling, pausing to reflect on the ancient Egyptians' relationship with time can be incredibly grounding. They remind us that time is fundamentally tied to nature, to the Earth's rotation, the sun's journey, and the stars' dance. They found order and meaning in these grand rhythms, shaping a civilization that endured for millennia. So, as the silent shadows of ancient Egypt recede from your mind, and the gentle hum of your surroundings fills the quiet, you carry with you a deeper appreciation for the relentless, yet often gentle, march of time. The Egyptians taught us that time is not just something to be measured. It is something to be observed, understood, and even revered. Its passage, whether marked by the shadow of an obelisk or the subtle drip of water, connects us all across the ages, a continuous, soothing whisper from the very dawn of civilization. The ancient world may be gone, but its quiet wisdom still guides the way we perceive and therefore live within the timeless flow of existence. The images fade, the ancient world melts into the quiet comfort of your surroundings. The soft hum of the fan, the gentle darkness, invite you to simply be. There's no rush now, no urgent shadow to chase, no water to meticulously measure. Just the steady, reassuring presence of the moment. Let the echoes of the sun, the stars, and the flowing Nile lull you into a deep, peaceful calm. The history is done, the lessons learned, and now only rest remains.